Welcome back to the Aerospace Executive Podcast. I'm really happy to have Brett Crozier with me. Brett is a former commanding officer of the USS Theodore Roosevelt, F-18 pilot, lifelong career naval officer, and now author of the book Surf When You Can. And he's got he's got 6 great points in Surf When You Can, and we'll talk about that at the end. So, hey, Brett, thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thanks, Craig. Happy to be here and appreciate the opportunity to chat with you.
So a couple of years ago, you were a really famous guy.
Yeah, I think that's how life works sometimes, I guess, right? You find yourself in a spotlight and you deal with it. But yeah, so it was a couple of years ago that I was the commanding officer of the Theodore Roosevelt, and we were kind of the front line on the battle with COVID, as they say, and we were figuring stuff out and kind of got in a position of extremis where, as a leader of the ship, we were kind of hitting some roadblocks that required me to kind of take a stand, I think, on behalf of the sailors that I was entrusted with. And that led to all kinds of attention.
Let's talk about something different, though. I don't want to talk about this. I want to talk cool. So I want to talk great Navy stuff here.
Yeah, let's do that.
Let's talk about commanding an aircraft carrier. I mean, we've got people. I talk to people every day. They're working small businesses, mid-sized businesses, big businesses. They're trying to figure out, and obviously, becoming the commanding officer of an aircraft carrier is that's a 25-year evolution to get there. I mean, one half of 1% of the officers of the Navy get to ever do that.
Yeah, it is a unique and awesome job. I mean, for many reasons, and it takes a while to get there. And obviously you have to want it and your family has to be willing to support you. But, just look at the life in the week of a commanding officer of aircraft carrier. I was lucky enough, I flew helicopters at the start of my career, fighters later. So I considered my best week as a CO underway was I could fly a helicopter one day and talk with the air wing and fly around the ship. And then 2 days later, I'd jump on a F-18 and fly a mission around the ship. And then next day I'd be on the bridge of the ship and we'd pull alongside and get millions of gallons of gas from another ship for our fighters. And so there was always a lot going on. And it took 5,000 people to do it, but definitely the pinnacle and the best job I ever had in the Navy by far.
We were talking about before we hit record, the leadership, the leadership style needed, you got a young crew, like really young crew. You've got a variety of jobs going from the glamour of the aviators, the glamorous jobs that the aviators get, to the young kid chipping paint and keeping everybody motivated. Yeah.
I mean, your average sailor on a aircraft carrier is, somewhere in the early 20s, right? So they're young and they're motivated though, right? That's what's awesome is when you can have a crew of 5,000 and they're all motivated to, not always, but I mean, they're there of their own will and they're excited about what they're doing, but you're doing some incredibly complex tasks. The best analogy for those that have never been on aircraft carriers, it's like running a city. I mean, anything a city of 5,000 people needs, you have. Mm-hmm. That's from power generation, which happens to come from 2 nuclear, reactors on board, to water, to sewage, to food, logistics, engineering, medical, dental, legal. You have your own media team. You have your own airport, of course, on the flight deck, which is the whole reason you have an aircraft carrier, and you can go wherever you want in the world in pretty quick order. So, and a complex, amazing organization, and it takes a lot. It takes 5,000 people. When you find yourself there in my case, after 25 plus years in the Navy, you're definitely challenged in ways you haven't been challenged before in terms of responsibilities of a leader at that level and that magnitude. I knew how to fly helicopters. I knew how to fly fighters. I had command of a squadron. I knew how to drive ships, actually, because you go through a whole training pipeline and you have command. I had command of the Blue Ridge in Japan. So the fundamentals of running a smaller ship, but and about naval reactors because you go through the school at a much later time in your life to figure it all out. And that's a requirement, in the Navy, that you understand and you can sign for those reactors. But then when you finally get there, I think, this is when you really kind of understand what it takes to run a large organization. A lot, all those finer details like we just talked about, but you're not going to do it yourself. You can't. It's impossible. I think Colin Powell said once, you delegate till you're uncomfortable, and then you delegate some more. If you are the CEO of an aircraft carrier and you do not know how to delegate and follow up and hold people accountable, but if you do know how to delegate, you will drive yourself crazy and it'll be miserable. I found that, I learned in short order, and it was kind of my style all the way through my career, is that I'd like to find the right level of leadership and empower them and give them the responsibility and the authority they needed to do their jobs, and delegate, and then kind of step back and watch. And sometimes they make mistakes, and you were always there to keep them in check, so those mistakes didn't result in some larger catastrophe. But I was never let down. I mean, aircraft carrier, you have 20 different HODs, or heads of department. One's in charge of the reactor, one's the engineer, one's in charge of supply, one's in charge of all aviation. So it's broken down pretty well, but you have to just, build the culture of support. You have to delegate to them. You have to ensure that culture allows them to work smoothly together. And then when things are running well and things are aligned like that, and you've built that positive culture that supports them and they feel empowered to do their job, then I'm telling you, there's no better job in the Navy. And there's days when it wasn't really hard. I mean, you got to sit back and watch them do what they're supposed to be doing. And those are the days you sit back on the bridge and put your feet up and just watch it happen. And
watch it all happen.
It was pretty neat. And then, and that's, obviously for leader, it's crucial too, because, at times you're the only one looking downrange. You're the only one looking 2, 4, 6 years down the road, or even sometimes a couple months down the road on where the ship needs to be, preparations for future deployments, thinking about stuff like about the crew. So, it takes that kind of culture, I think, to gave me the white space I needed to be able to step back and kind of think some of those bigger thoughts and not worry about the day to day. So, and I think that's true in any organization of that size. You have to be able to delegate, and you have to hopefully have the right people to delegate to empower them. And then as a CEO or CEO of an aircraft carrier, you have to then also use that time wisely to provide that strategic guidance of where you're trying to go as an organization.
So at what point, you've got 20 department heads, so 20 direct reports, which is a lot. And you got to trust each and every one of them and trust the fact that they've been trained well. At what point do you start to trust them? And, what point do you start to really trust them? Because, and you come into industry, you get a lot of changeover. You got a lot, I think people hire people and it's 6 to 12 months of a trust building process before they actually start to gel.
Well, so you're right. I mean, they are well trained and they're handpicked, and to get in those positions, they're generally some of the top people in their respective community. So supply corps sends only their best, or the medical corps sends only their top doctor. So my attitude was I was going to start right off the bat by trusting them. I was going to trust them until they proved otherwise. And I gave them the benefit of the doubt, because otherwise it does take time to build that trust from scratch. Right. So if I went into with the idea we were at a point where there was no trust at all, I mean, that would have been a miserable 6 months. And I would have, you'd have to take away that trust they already had with the previous commanding officer. And you'd have to, take away the authority they already had to get their day-to-day job done. So my strategy was to go in and basically, okay, I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt. You guys are here because you were handpicked. I used to say, I said, you guys are handpicked. You're the top of your community. I said, we could probably take over a small country with a group like this, or we could run a small country, because they really were that talented. And, so we might not have all the answers, but we can figure it out. And I told him, I said, I'll trust you until you prove otherwise. I think you have to. I mean, I can compare it to what I do now in a nonprofit world as the chief operating officer of a pretty large nonprofit. But, in a nonprofit that I was not familiar with, we deal with things like mental health and substance abuse for veterans. And we can talk more about that later. But I'm coming into a new world that I'm not as familiar with. And if I came in and immediately took away all the trust that my predecessor had with the direct reports, man, things would come to a screeching halt. And that would not allow us to achieve our mission. So again, much like the military, you come in and you give them the benefit of the doubt, then you monitor them, and you tell them your goals, and you tell them what you expect, and you have to be clear about your vision and when you want things reported to you. But I do think sometimes people come in and make the mistake of assuming no trust or make them prove that they need that trust. And I try to approach it the other way.
Yep.
I'll give you the trust you deserve right now. And then until you prove otherwise, I won't take that back. And it worked. For me, it worked. I was never let down.
What about delegation? You were talking about delegation. The need for leaders to delegate.
Yeah, absolutely essential.
The curse of the micromanager. You make yourself crazy and everybody else crazy too.
Yeah, because we know that the small details matter in any organization. The small details, the small ball of baseball, as they say, you got to get that right. But it doesn't mean you have to micromanage. It means you can. I think you can pay attention to the details of any large organization. In today's era, you have things like dashboards and data reporting that allow you to do that much more easily than before. We have email, which for good or bad allows you to monitor things way down beneath you as an executive sometimes. But that's part of that trust thing, right? You delegate to somebody because for many reasons. One, maybe you don't want to do it. But two, it's because, if you delegate right and you give somebody the authority that comes with that responsibility, which essentially is what delegation is, then they're going to own it, right? And you teach ownership. So you can't just give away tasks you don't want to do. You have to, with that task comes responsibility. That delegation, right, comes responsibility. And with that responsibility, they need the authority to execute. And that could be financial. In my current organization, if I delegate a program to somebody and I say, you're in charge of this program, that better come with people and money necessary to execute that. And then I also say, I'm going to hold you responsible. Here's what I expect. But if you do that and you delegate, now it's they're going to own it. They're going to own it and do the best job they can, no doubt. And they're not going to be coming to you every time they want to, buy something. They're not going to come to you every time they want to make a personnel move. You delegate that level and you give them the authority and the responsibility and the power they need to execute the authority, then they're generally going to step up. And that's what I think. Yeah, people have to understand delegation. It's not just getting rid of things you don't want to do. It's giving the task to the right people, give them those tools they need to succeed. And then as a leader, you just have to have your checkpoints so you can make sure they're on track, or you tell them when you want to be reported to. But then it gives you as a leader the free time to think those strategic thoughts, to decide where the ship should be going or where the organization should be going. But if you don't, especially in today's era where everybody's a phone call or an email or a text away, you can micromanage like you read about. And that is just, then I'm not being a leader. I'm not being an executive. I'm just being a program director. And I'm, and I'm basically trying to run it all. And I think that is never the recipe for success in any organization, inside or outside the military.
Yeah, that's, I just did a search for a CEO of a small company, and the board was, there was one thing the board was talking about is the founder of the company who's going to be exiting never understood the importance of finding somebody to get him out of the weeds.
Yeah.
So the strategic vision, and now he's selling his company. He was so far in the weeds, the strategic vision couldn't be found. And if you're too,
I've seen companies here that, where a CEO, it's the way it's set up, the CEO has all the direct reports coming to him. And, I argue this is where you need to execute. If you're big enough and you can afford it, having a COO or having a CFO, that let them handle those direct reports. And if you're truly the CEO, you have one more layer between you. Again, it takes revenue to do that and be able to afford that. But even in the nonprofit world, we're set up now where you have the CEO and she's got a CFO and I'm the COO. And that gives her that layer she needs. And she understands what happens every day. She's been there before. She's been doing it for a long time, but she's delegated the operations to me as an example. And then I there in turn can use my directors underneath me and delegate to them as required and provide that. But I think you're right. It's too easy in today's era, particularly maybe for founders, right? Where it's like, I don't know. Founders are like raising your kid, right? It's hard to let your kid go. And that's the curse of the founder is it's hard to let go. It's your kid. So
that's exactly, I can tell you how many COOs I've placed, and they all come in, they quit 12 months later, they'll quit and they'll say, he never let me do anything, or she never never would let go. I still remember the conversation I had with a fella, and he was, I think it was, it was one of the civilian aggressor squadrons. And he was the COO, and he said they never would. They wanted process, they wanted procedures. I put a process of procedures in. but they didn't
Yeah.
want to follow them. So I'm like, hey, look, if you guys don't want to do what you hired me to do, there's no sense in me being here.
Right.
And now he's a very successful CEO somewhere else.
Right.
And he's done really well. So it's like pushing on
Yeah.
the rope a little bit.
And it's, you know, I always say too, it's good when you're the CEO in those situations because it's a good reminder that, you know, when you elevate to a CEO position somewhere else that, you know, remember what it felt like and remember how you really, you know, if you're going to hire somebody to be a COO or CFO, well, then let them do their job, you know, give them the authority they need, give them the resources, and then step back and let them do it and don't micromanage. But sometimes easier said than done, I'm sure.
So you were very popular commanding officer. I mean, your crew had held you in very high regard. I
had a good team.
Were you
were
you down in the trenches with them a lot and kind of, you know, what was the style that you brought to that team?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I think I don't know that I did anything other than just try to talk to everybody like peers. You know, you know, if I could have walked around the ship without a rank or, you know, uniform that identified me, I probably would have done that just because I thought that was always sometimes the best way to get good, honest feedback from the folks that you work with. But no, I think I learned as a kid, like from my dad who ran a small company that, you know, no one's any better than anybody else. And you might be lucky enough to find yourself in charge and in a position where you're leading others, and your number one responsibility is to take care of others. Right now, I particularly in the military, it's, you know, you take care of the folks so they can do their mission because you obviously can't do it all the time, but that's part of a larger discussion about, you know, military missions. But yeah, I think the leader's number one responsibility is to take care of their folks. And the best way you can take care of your sailors or your team is to know what they need, know what the barriers are, know what the challenges are. And to do that, you have to just have a style of communication that's open. I mean, I had an open door policy even on the carrier, and I kept my door open, you know, unless I was in my room sleeping, I'd have my office door open, and you know, you get young sailors who'd peek in just to see what the captain's office looked like, and then I'd always call them in and, hey, what's going on? And I have them sit down. You know, the advantage of being the carrier CEO is you have a kitchen and a cook right next, you know, adjacent to your office, and they made cookies. They made like, I don't know, 100 cookies a day, and obviously I could eat about half that per day, but I really tried to get rid of the cookies. So I used to always bring people in and just randomly find a sailor and bring them in, give them some cookies, and just talk about what's going on. But if you talk to people, you know, like you're sitting down for dinner, just, you know, and you kind of get rid of the rank a little bit. I mean, they know who you are, right? They know the authority, the power that comes with the position of commanding officer. But so that never has to come up, right? It's already understood. So you can communicate with them in a direct way and just hear what's going on and joke with them about sports or joke with them about, you know, where they're from or talk about their families. I felt like you know, I know they appreciate it, but I felt like I really learned a lot from that. You know, it was maybe a two-way street, but I felt like I was always learning more from them than they probably learned from me, just because they got to understand, you know, everybody's background and how varied and diverse it is on a ship that size. You know, I think we had sailors from every state in the country. We had sailors from overseas that had, you know, were working on, you know, their citizenship. So they came from foreign countries and we had them in certain rates. So pretty remarkable. So you can learn a lot. I mean, you just have to be open to it, and you have to be approachable enough, I guess, to talk to them in a way that they want to share stuff with you. So that was my secret sauce if there was one, but I think more than anything, I just think I was blessed with a good crew that understood what we were there to do.
That's awesome. So let's talk about something else. You mentioned you started out with helicopters.
Yeah.
Age 60s.
Yeah. So 60 Bravos, you know, the Seahawk, you know, the Seahawk variant of the Blackhawk. And my first duty station was at Barbers Point, Hawaii. Okay. So they're on the southwest corner of Oahu with the HSL 37 Easy Riders. And I tell you what, there's no better first tour for a naval aviator that, you know, grew up in California, loved to surf, loved the water. And so, yeah, my wife and I headed off there after flight school, and we spent 3 years in Barbers Point, Hawaii, and loved everything about it.
How'd you make the transition to F-18s? Talk about that. And then talk about what is, you make that transition. All of a sudden now you're a new guy, even though you're a little bit more experienced, you're still a new guy.
Yeah. So, and I'll have to be fair for all the helicopter folks out there. I absolutely loved flying helicopters. Like flying a helicopter is like you and two buddies jumping in a truck and just heading out. Your mission changes every day. I mean, you're flying helicopters around Hawaii, you're all around the world. It was awesome. I had a great time, and you're part of a team. And so every helicopter flight was like a road trip. So when the opportunity came, 2 years later to transition to fighters, and I knew it was an opportunity I didn't want to pass up. It was something I'd always thought about from the day I was 16 and a movie called Top Gun came out, and it always seemed like another exciting opportunity. So I didn't, and I knew if I didn't get it, I would have been fine flying helicopters. I absolutely loved everything about it. But yeah, so fast forward now, I went through flight school the first time, not married, no kids. I got picked up for a transition, and that's just based on kind of needs of the Navy. They had, if you have more folks than you need in one community and less than you need in another, then they open up the spigot, so to speak, and you can apply, and they look at your record and your performance to date. And so I was lucky enough to get picked up to go fly F-18s. So now you go back to flight school. So now I'm much more senior. I think it's, halfway through the transition, I'm a lieutenant commander select. So I'm much senior than even the instructors that I had. I'm married and we have 2 kids. So my perspective on flight school the second time was a little bit different. And in a good way, in that I was not as distracted by all the things that you often are distracted by in Pensacola, which is like the beach and the sun and the fishing opportunities. I had to really focus, because I think going from flying something that's crew concept, helicopter with, a couple folks there to help you out, to now you're single seat trying to learn how to fly relatively the T-45 for me, the Goshawk, and trying to do it all yourself. And I still have this clear vision of when I was in one of my second simulators, and they start you off by teaching you how to fly instruments. So knowing how to fly a jet, bad weather, navigating approaches in and out of airfields is critical. And in fact, it tends to be something you keep with you the rest of your career. But in helicopter, you always have another pilot, so you can delegate those responsibilities, and one person can talk, one person can fly. It's a much probably better environment. In a fighter, it's all you. Like, you're talking on the radios, you're trying to flip through your charts, you're trying to write down frequencies. And I remember I did okay. I remember the end of the simulator where we had simulated flying into Biloxi or something in bad weather, and the instructor opens up the canopy, and I've got stuff everywhere. Like, it's a yard sale of approach plates, and I'm writing on grease pencil on the cockpit, on the canopy. And he's like, you got to figure out how to do this a little more smoothly. I'm like, I'll get there. And so, like anything, the Navy's got a great training program, and you focus on it, and you learn how to do it very well and safe. And so, soon enough, I found myself in a fleet squadron flying F-18s. As I was going through the RAG, through the FRS and Lemoore when 9/11 kicked off. And so, suddenly this huge focus on, what's going to happen now. And obviously the intensity and the seriousness of what we're doing mattered. But I found myself now in a squadron and a nugget, as we say, on their first tour, but also a senior in rank lieutenant commander. So it was kind of a weird dynamic. One that I enjoyed, one that I found I did well in, but it was certainly a lesson in how to be humble and how to, despite the fact you might be 3 or 4 years senior to your instructors or experienced lieutenants, you better treat every flight as a learning opportunity, and you better just, open your eyes and your ears and listen to everything. And that's what, as naval aviation is great for that. I mean, we don't bring our rank into the debriefs, we say, right? You leave your rank at the door. So it sets itself up well for that. And that, as long as you remain humble and you are there to learn, then the culture is there in naval aviation to teach you. And that's true whether you're an ensign or you're the captain of an aircraft carrier and you're come back to land, and the LSO has come to grade you on your landing. And a one wire is not a good pass as the captain of the carrier or as a junior officer. Right. So
that's a hard position to be in. That's a hard position to be in, though. You're that senior, more senior guy on your first tour. You've got people who are much more experienced than you. It's a different dynamic that takes a lot of emotional intelligence to navigate through both directions. The more junior people, are paying you the respect you deserve, but you're obviously respecting their experience as well.
Yeah. And I think the ownership ideally was on me, and that I didn't want to ever give them an excuse to do anything but, hold me accountable for my performance. And it would be easy enough to put a barrier up or, in some cases, these guys worked for me in their day job, right? They worked for me in their ground job, as they say. So day to day, they were following my orders. But when it came to flying, as an example, because that's where I was not as familiar, the tables were reversed. And So it would be easy enough to put a barrier in place, even subconsciously, right? And just in your mannerisms. So I always took it like I wanted to make sure that there were no barriers and they felt totally comfortable, because that's the only way I was going to learn. And that's, as you don't stop learning there either. You learn.
Mhm.
I mean, those same lessons proved well when I was going through nuclear power school, and I'm one of 2 commanders in a classroom of 25 ensigns and lieutenant JGs trying to learn physics and nuclear power and electrical engineering much later in my life. And you get the same tests and you're held to the same standard. But man, you have to learn much more quickly than you remember after 25 years or 20 years since you've been in college last.
It's hard to go back to that. It's hard to go back to that. It really is hard to change your mindset. Did you always want to be? I mean, I run into a lot of young kids. They're like, I want to be a CEO one day. It's like, well, all right. Did you always know that you wanted to be that, or did you just take your life kind of one step at a time and see where, just do the best you could and see where it all took you?
Yeah. I mean, go back to 18-year-old Brett. I was, I went to the Naval Academy and with one purpose, I just wanted to fly. Like I didn't understand what came from beyond that. I just said, I want to go to Pensacola to fly helicopters, fighters, whatever came my way. And that was enough to get me through Naval Academy and get to flight school. It probably wasn't until I was later in my first squadron tour in Hawaii that I started understanding a little bit how the Navy worked and the opportunities out there. And it probably wasn't until I realized I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed everything about the Navy, the travel, the adventure, feeling like you're making a difference somewhere in the world. The camaraderie, the teamwork, it felt like a sports team most days in a squadron. And as I started getting more and more comfortable with it, I started enjoying it more and more. I think I started looking like, well, how do I keep doing this? Like, I could go to the airlines, or I could go do something on outside of the Navy. And I definitely had those thoughts. I mean, even before the transition to fighters, to F-18s, I remember putting some serious thought into going to work in the corporate side and do other stuff. But in the end of the day, it's like, God, I really love what I'm doing. I don't know why I would do anything else. And there might be a day where I stop loving it, in which case, well, you better do something else. If you don't like what you're doing, well, find something else to do, I guess, or find a different way to do it. But so as my horizon expanded and I understood what opportunities presented itself, to me, the aircraft carrier CO was just something that was, just still stood out as an incredible opportunity. And it probably, but again, I was a helicopter guy that didn't necessarily fly on aircraft carriers until later in my career when I transitioned. So it was a little bit later in my career that I remember looking at the aircraft carrier CO, like this guy's he's like a god. He's an oracle, right? He's in charge of all this stuff. How does he do it? I used to see that there in North Island, I'd see the carrier skipper on the Nimitz running around the base. And I'm like, man, how does he have time to go run? How does he do that? He's got all his responsibility. And then fast forward, suddenly you're the CEO of the aircraft carrier. And like, how did I get here again? Yeah. Do people look at me the same way I looked at that guy? Cause I thought he was about 80 and I thought he was, and untouchable. But anyways, it was a great opportunity. And I always said, I'm going to keep doing this and as long as I'm having fun. And I had fun through the TR and even my last 2 years after the TR, the Roosevelt. I had a great time on the staff and working with more great folks in the Navy, and retired, 2 years after that, and had fun every step of the way.
I love it.
They're hard days, but
somebody asked me, both my twins graduated college last week, and somebody said, but go back to your 21, 22-year-old self. What would you tell yourself? I was like, focus, become really good at the thing that's right in front of me. Yeah. And then, just keep, put all the distractions aside and just keep moving forward. And I think it's something that people forget is, when you become the guy or the girl in what you're doing, a lot of doors open up to you. But understanding what the task in front of you is and becoming good at it is the key to that forward progress. Right. Also.
One of the things I talk about in the book is it's about small ball, right? It's the philosophy, and you can attribute it to different baseball teams along the way and the go-go Sox of the yesteryear. But the idea being that, if you really want to have a good team and be part of a good team, it's, you're not going to fill a team with home run hitters, right? That's not what you need. And it's about everybody doing their job and being good at the small ball, being good at the day-to-day tasks and being good at what your job is. And that's, leads to a larger, that's your part of the pie, and that's helps a large organization, and all that cumulatively together
Mhm.
allows for great things. But in today's society, I think it's easy to get focused on the startup wonder who makes, $100 million in funding, and, with the never, and that's, it's the Amazons. It's those guys work really hard to actually do that. And it's also very exceptional that you're going to, not have to work really hard to get there. And
but also it's also about the day to day. You got to be good today to be great tomorrow. But all right, so you brought it up. Let's talk about the book. You got all right. So I'm going to read them here. Six really good points of the book. Value relationships. Let's see. Choose kindness. Seek balance. Communicate effectively and clearly. Stand up for what you believe, and accept responsibility.
Yeah.
For your actions.
Yeah. So I think, I never, again, 18-year-old Brett, I wouldn't have thought I wrote a book someday. Obviously the TR presented opportunity to give me a little bit of a platform, and my impetus for writing the book was less about the TR. I mean, there's a chapter about the Roosevelt and stuff, but it's more about, I think, all the incredible things I learned about being a person, being just a kind human being, being a leader, about life. And I think it all leads to overall my philosophy on leadership. But yeah, so I had a really good time writing. I mean, it's like any project, writing a book, they say it takes clear thinking to write clearly, and it takes clear writing to think clearly. Or, my friend Chris Bolt used to say, written out is thought out. And
great guy.
And so he's a great guy. And so I took that to heart, and he's obviously in the book for all the positive things he taught me along the way. But so writing written out is thought out. And I wanted to pay tribute to all the incredible people I served with, all the fun stories I had. My goal, I said, was someone's going to read this book and go, man, I didn't think about joining the Navy because I didn't understand it. Now I understand more about it. I understand all the opportunity. I understand all the adventures. I understand about people. And that young kid, that young Brett of, who's 18 trying to figure out what to do in life might consider this a career path. Or someone in the Navy reads it and understands it, gives it maybe a broader perspective on what leaders are thinking about. But for me, I guess it just comes down to, in some ways it's the golden rule: treat others how you want to be treated, or when in doubt, lead with kindness, however you want to phrase it. But I found that more often than not, I was successful in many interactions because I try to look at it with that side of compassion. It's easy to quickly judge something. It's easy to want to get angry and snap at somebody. But, when you're a senior leader, you do that has a huge effect on the culture. People stop wanting to talk to you. People want to stop wanting to bring you feedback or tell you when things aren't going right. So I think you've got to be approachable. You have to lead with kindness. And I never felt bad about giving someone the benefit of the doubt, but I always felt bad if I jumped to judgment and I snapped at somebody in my career. And I was like, I was probably a little quick to judge on that, or I, there was no reason for me to be angry. So that's always one. I also think life is about relationships. I think it's, our relationship right here, you and I talking, my relationship with guys like Bolter, or your family or your friends. And so I try to tell the story of my career and my experiences through the people I met. And it goes all the way back to a staff job I had in Italy, where I learned about, teamwork from a guy named Luigi, who was, Italian lieutenant colonel, and made a point of dragging me down to have espresso with a couple of folks I worked with, because he understood the importance of trust and teamwork, even at that level. And now I look at Luigi with a smile on my face, because he was just a super friendly guy that understood fundamentally the importance, of relationships, and how that led to trust, and how that leads to success in an organization. And so there's I tell it all. There's a bunch of chapters. I use various titles like, how to prioritize. I think one of the other ones is, focus on the closest alligator, which comes to good leaders have to be able to prioritize so they can make the important decisions. I talk about small ball because I think, like you and I said, is the importance of the day-to-day mission. Not every action has to be a home run. Not every flight is, launching off the carrier to get shot down, to jump in an F-14, to fly back and celebrate, on a, Maverick 2 type of scenario. That's the reality is, as it's day in and day out. People are launching off aircraft carriers and coming back and doing these things each and every day. And then there's sailors that are down on that bilges the aircraft carrier. Their sole job is to stare at a reactor and make sure it operates safely. It's everybody doing their part, playing the small ball that leads to the success. And I think that's always important for a leader to understand. And, we've kind of touched on all the others and the importance of delegation and stuff. But so, yeah, I hope people enjoy it. It was fun to write. It was, my way to pay tribute to all the sailors I got to work with and a way to kind of tie it together based on what I thought were the important lessons that I kind of distilled from my career. And I think, obviously the title is Surf When You Can, which makes it fall outside the normal titles of probably a leadership book. And it is certainly more than a leadership book, but the importance of that to me is that as a leader, you have to have balance too. And I've talked about delegation and white space and the importance of being able to step back and think and you have to have balance. I mean, there's no CEO that's going to be born a CEO and die a CEO. There's life on the outside of being a CEO or a commanding officer or a COO or an executive. And so live your life accordingly, balance it, make sure, you have time for your family and yourself. Because at the end of the day, those jobs go away and it's just a job. You can make a huge impact. You can make a big difference. But at the end of the day, hopefully you spent the time along the way. So, your wife that you had when you started your career is the same wife at the end, if you're lucky enough. And that doesn't work out for everybody. But I think if you've approached it with the goal of, I want to maximize my relationships throughout this process and spend the time when I can. I think you're okay. So I do. That's my hobby. I like to surf, amongst other things, but I love surfing. And I love that when I surf, I can't bring my phone. And I love that, I can be out there and not worrying about, I can think about work. And you do, but you're focused on things like the lineup and the currents and the sets coming in and the wind. And you also have time for big thoughts that maybe it's kind of like when you have people that run or they meditate or do yoga. It's the same thing. You're able to think the big thoughts of, okay, what should we be doing as a ship or what should we be doing as a company? What are the big ideas that are going to make you successful? And to me, surfing allows me to do that. So that was why I thought it was a good title for all those other lessons.
There's a great Wall Street Journal article about that, and they said, you bring everybody into a room, and there's a value in solitude.
Yeah,
and you bring everybody in a room, and everybody's throwing ideas. Okay, put all your crazy ideas up on a board. It causes confusion. Where do all the big ideas come from? For me, they come in the gym. Somewhere, I jump rope a lot in the gym. I do a lot of CrossFit. That's where my ideas come from. For you, they come from, maybe surfing. And I think that maybe that concept needs to be understood a little bit more.
Yeah, and I think, and certainly as you get more senior, right, this kind of goes back to the whole idea of delegation and micromanagement. You've got to provide that separation. In some cases, it's physical separation. Get yourself on a surfboard or go to the gym or go running, put your running shoes on. So you're not doing the micromanagement. Then you can step away. And if you've ever followed me on when I'm not surfing, if I'm running, I'll run a couple miles and you'll see me stop and I'll pull out my phone because I'm listening to it. And I'll have a note that it's so important. I better write this note down because I'll forget it by the time I finish my run.
I do that all the time.
My wife's like, why do you like, she'll ride her bike or she'll like, why do you stop? I'm like, because this is such a good idea. And I know myself well enough that if I finish this run without writing it down, I'll forget all about it.
Yeah.
And it might still be a silly idea, but
I know I do that all the time. I take my phone to the gym. It's off in the corner, but I start to think about stuff and I tap myself out. And a lot of times I just tap my blogs out in the gym.
Oh, do you? Yeah.
On my phone. But the rush to judgment thing. In the day of social media, Fox News, one-sided communication. I have this conversation with people a lot. Are you sure you don't understand the other side of the story? Are you just seeing with the media? Social media is a dangerous place. The media in general is a dangerous place.
Yeah.
Did you teach that?
It feeds off
your crews.
The dopamine effect, right? If the idea that news and knowledge is power, and the idea is that the first to bring the news. So as you get more senior on an aircraft carrier, obviously your time's important, and you need information to make decisions, and people love to bring you information because it's subconscious at times, right? They're aware of something that's happened on the ship or off the ship, and they want to bring it to your attention because there's loyalty there and there's trust. and I understand why it happens. I used to say all the time, and again, it's probably something I learned from somebody else, I'm sure, but the truth is always in the third report. So the idea being, in the morning, I'd sit down with my XO and my command master chief, and we'd have coffee on the ship where we were. And it was kind of our time to sync and talk about the day and talk about what's going on. And I, the master chief, who's generally up earlier, is getting more information. He'd always come in and say, okay, here's what's happened. Or we heard this report of a sailor doing this, or this particular piece of engineering equipment's broken. And that's not only is it broken, but we're gonna have to pull in. It's going to take 6 weeks to fix it. And so it'd be very easy, right, to pick up the phone, call the Chang, hey, what's going on? Call the admiral. But you've only gotten like a snippet of information. You have to understand. I used to remind myself, somebody is eager to get that information out because it's information, but it's not necessarily the truth. It's not backed by the facts. So I just, we'd say, okay, truth's in the third report. Let's see what happens. And then like an hour later, you get another report like, no, it's not a big deal. We can fix this in the next hour. It's people are blown out of proportion. All right. So that's your counter to the first report of this piece of engineering equipment broken or the sailor getting in trouble. But by the time the third report came in, like later in the day, when people have the time to assess the information and the facts and actually look at the evidence, the truth was somewhere in the middle. So that was a saying I always had, and truth's in the third report. So never overreact. There could be times you're going to overreact. There can be times when, sir, we're about to run over a ship.
Yep.
Okay, well, you better turn. Or if you're flying, as you know, in aviation, you're making quick reactions all the time based on information, sometimes limited information. But when you're talking on a large organization with all these processes in place and people and leadership, generally you're not, unless you're on the bridge, you're talking about aviation stuff, the things you're getting do not require instant decisions by you. Mm-hmm. It's more you understanding the impact of the schedule and the mission. So I just always try to give the time for the right people to get involved, to get their eyes on the equipment or talk to the sailor. And then, by the time it all panned out, you get to that final third report. And that was usually pretty close. So I try to teach that even here in my nonprofit, because people are eager to bring me information about something that's happened to a veteran client or a problem with a facility. And, you just kind of have to nod and say, okay, thanks. Let me know. Let me know we find out.
Let's figure it out.
Come back. And then by the end of the day, you've got a pretty accurate report or much closer to the truth. And then you can make your decisions based on that. And so, but yes, I think in today's society, we tend to want to push information out there unfiltered as quick as we can, because again, when you're not on your surfboard or if you're staring at your phone all the time, you have access, and you have to be careful with that. And I think organizations have to be careful. You and I, we've probably both deployed when there was no internet and there was no email. Mm-hmm. So when you deployed in the Navy on a ship, you had this very ancient system now where you type out messages and it'd be sent and you'd wait to get reports. Or if you're writing a message or letter home, you write a letter to your wife and you'd number the letter. Mm-hmm. When you stamp the letter. So that way, when she got that letter, she knew the right order in case it got mixed up, but she probably got that letter 6 weeks after you mailed it.
Oh, sure.
And so there was just, it was a different environment. Now everything is so quick. We have internet, you have Wi-Fi on ships. People back in DC can monitor the status of your fuel system on an aircraft carrier thousands of miles away. And so we tend to gravitate towards that, respond to the first report. And I think sometimes we do that in error, from my experience.
Yeah. But from a leadership standpoint, look, it's easy to come to, from somebody's cell phone camera, it's easy to come up with a very quick judgment. But like you said, the truth always lies in the third report. Let's hear what's going on the other side. What you saw off camera.
Yeah, a little bit of patience. That's it.
So the book is Simon & Schuster, Surf When You Can.
So Atria Books from Simon & Schuster. It comes out June 13th.
Okay.
So a couple weeks away from when this recording is. But I'm pretty excited about it. I think hopefully it appeals to not just the folks in the military, but the broader audience that doesn't necessarily know what it's like to lead in the military or serve in the military. That was I was mindful of that when I wrote it. I
think the 6 points, that you sort of highlighted, are very relevant. To whether it's business or personal or whatever, it's very relevant to just everyday life. So well done. I'm looking forward to seeing the release, and I hope you have a lot of success with it.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate that, Craig. It's again, it was fun to write, and hope people enjoy it.
Thanks for coming on. I know it's a big ask on a Friday afternoon. I appreciate you coming on and talking about it a little bit.
No sweat. It's always fun to talk about Navy, naval aviation, Craig. So I appreciate the opportunity, and leadership is it's something you're always learning, right? And I even today I'm learning more about leadership from what I do now. And so, I think it's important for folks to keep that open mind and understand it's a lifelong, I guess, endeavor to learn to be the best leader you can. And I enjoy the chance to chat about it today.
Awesome. Hey, thanks for coming on, Brett. Appreciate it.
All right. Thanks, Craig. See you.
I hope you enjoyed the latest edition of the Aerospace Executive Podcast. You can reach out to me directly, Craig at northstaresg.com, or check us out at www.northstaresg.com. You can subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, Podbean, or on YouTube. Just do a search for Aerospace Executive Podcast. Thanks again. I'm Craig Piven.